On this edition of Jerusalem Dateline, The 21, the film of the 21 Christian men who paid the ultimate sacrifice for their faith. ISIS filmed their deaths, and the world saw true faith. We meet the filmmakers who produced the movie honoring these men and the families who continue their legacy. All this and more on this special edition of Jerusalem Dateline.
Hello, and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Paul Strand. On today's special program, we'll examine the impact of 21 Christian men killed by ISIS on camera 10 years ago. We'll have a report from our bureau chief, Chris Mitchell, who traveled to Egypt to cover their story. But first, here are the latest news updates, followed by Chris in Egypt.
In the middle of the night, without any fanfare, Hamas handed over the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages to the Red Cross, who then passed them on to the Israeli police and IDF. The bodies of Tzachi Idan from Kibbutz Nachal Oz, Itzhak Elgarat and Ohad Yahalomi from Kibbutz Nir Oz, and 85-year-old Shlomo Mansour from Kibbutz Kitzufim were all identified by morning. President Isaac Herzog tweeted, "In this painful moment, there is some solace in knowing that they will be laid to rest in dignity in Israel." Israel then released more than 600 Palestinian prisoners, including 71 who were serving life sentences. Israel delayed the release for several days in protest over what it called cruel treatment of hostages during their handover by Hamas. The exchanges followed a day of mourning in Israel. More than 100,000 people lined the roads as the funeral procession of Shiri Bibas and her 2 little boys, Ariel and Kfir, passed by. Video of the little red-headed boys wrapped in their frightened mother's arms became the symbol of the treachery and cruelty that Hamas perpetrated on October 7, 2023. Shiri's husband, Yarden, who was also taken captive from their kibbutz near Oz, was released on February 1st, only to receive the bodies of his wife and children back 3 weeks later. At the funeral, Yarden expressed his love for his wife, calling her his best friend.
Do you remember our last decision together in the safe room? I asked if we should fight or surrender. You said fight, so I fought. Shiri, I'm sorry I couldn't protect all of you. If only I had known what would happen, I would not have fired.
He spoke to 4-year-old Ariel.
I hope you're enjoying paradise. I'm sure you're making all the angels laugh with your silly jokes and impressions. I hope there are plenty of butterflies for you to watch, just like you did during our picnics.
And to 9-month-old Kfir.
I need you to know that I love you a lot and miss you a lot. I miss nibbling on you and hearing your laughter.
Shiri's sister, who also lost her parents that day, asked Shiri for forgiveness.
I promise you, as I promised Mom and Dad, that the monsters beyond the fence will not succeed in their mission. They will not defeat us. They will not break us. On the contrary, their mission failed because we united, because we grew stronger, because we became invincible. They lost.
The overnight releases complete the first phase of handing over around 1,800 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for 33 Israeli hostages, leaving 59 hostages in Hamas captivity, around 20 of whom are believed to be alive. President Trump's special Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, says he believes he can get an extension of Phase 1 and the release of more hostages.
The Gaza ceasefire is set to end this weekend unless negotiators can quickly work out an agreement to continue it. Israel is sending a team to talks in Cairo to try to work out such an agreement.
We are ready to make the framework longer in a return to release of more hostages.
America's top Mideast negotiator, Steve Witkoff, is headed to the region to push for extending the ceasefire, and he's clear that Hamas cannot remain in the key areas because of its terrorism.
There's no room for Hamas in Gaza, in the West Bank. You can see from their actions that they haven't earned that right to be there.
Hamas is refusing to disarm. Zahar says Israel can't put up with that.
This is, from our point of view, total unacceptable.
Israel's defense minister agrees Hamas must no longer be allowed to govern or have the means to fight in Gaza.
Hamas will not remain in control of Gaza, neither for civil matters nor military. It will not be because it cannot be.
Katz also says Israel won't withdraw from the vital Philadelphi corridor, which Hamas used to smuggle in weapons.
The IDF is maintaining a defined buffer zone in Gaza.
Israel's long-term goal is to prevent Hamas from having the weapons to again attack the Jewish nation. But a Wall Street Journal report says Hamas is ready to return to guerrilla warfare in Gaza if the ceasefire ends. It's recruited thousands of new troops, has appointed new commanders, and has turned unexploded ordnance into deadly IEDs to blow up Israeli troops. And in the U.S., a leading U.S. congressman is now making a change on the area commonly known as the West Bank. He says his committee staff should now call it Judea and Samaria, the biblical names for that part of Israel. House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Brian Mast writes in a memo to the committee, "Jewish roots in this region span centuries, and we must recognize that fact in both word and deed." He adds Congress needs to recognize Israel's rightful claim to the cradle of Jewish civilization. On the ground, at least 10 people were wounded in a ramming attack at a bus stop in central Israel Thursday, apparently carried out by a Palestinian who was living illegally in Israel. Israel is concerned about an outbreak of terror attacks in Judea and Samaria. The Muslim fasting month of Ramadan begins as early as tonight. Often there has been an upsurge in terror attacks during that time.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. Coming to you from the Church of the Martyrs in Minya, Egypt, that commemorates the 20 Egyptians and one man from Ghana who paid the ultimate sacrifice on a beach in Libya in 2015. February 2015, 21 men stood on the edge of eternity on this beach, dressed in orange, hands bound. They were given one choice: deny their faith or die. They chose death.
We heard about it as soon as it happened, basically. Once the video was broadcast, it spread like wildfire. It was a declaration by the Islamic State to put fear in the hearts of the Coptic Church and the Coptic people, whom they considered their favorite prey.
While the world saw their deaths, their families felt the loss of fathers, brothers, and sons.
For the families, it was devastating. I don't think they even considered themselves martyrs. They just saw that their husbands had just been killed, their fathers had just been killed, their brothers had just been killed. And so the families mourned greatly.
They were simple men, 20 Egyptians and one man from Ghana, working in Libya to support their families, then captured by ISIS.
I think for many people, we remember the images, at least the orange jumpsuits, where the 21 were beheaded, and we know that they did not recant their faith. What we don't know is that that came only after weeks, if not even months, of torture and other efforts to get those 21 to recant their faith.
6 years ago, on a trip to Egypt, Mark Rogers learned about the 21 and decided to tell their story.
In the early 21st century, ISIS began a reign of terror in attempts to cleanse North Africa of Christians. One of their favorite prey? Egyptian Coptic Christians.
Bringing it to the screen proved to be a labor of faith and perseverance. The result is The 21, an animated film.
So it took 6 years to make. There were over 70 animators from over 20 countries that participated in the making. So it was really a global effort to support this community's own story, to elevate it, because in some ways it's all of our stories, Christians.
The real joy to have so many artists from literally around the world contribute.
The 21 then made it to the Oscar shortlist for Best Animated Film.
We always aimed to produce the film at a level of quality that it would be competitive at that level of the Oscars, but never had any real expectation that we would make it that far in the process. And out of 90 films, the 15 that were chosen, our film was one, and God gets all the credit for that. And it was just wonderful to have the film elevated in that way. It was never our primary goal, but we feel very blessed that that level of visibility in the industry allowed us to reach an audience we wouldn't have otherwise.
Unlike traditional documentaries, the film uses sacred Coptic imagery, turning the martyrs' final moments into a visual prayer of faith. The producers chose traditional animation because of its unique ability to make challenging subjects approachable and use artwork central to the Coptic faith.
First of all, it's a brutal story. It's a hard story, and to show that in live action would be very difficult. Through the Coptic Church, they have a long tradition of iconography, and they use iconography to reflect something. So they'll see something in the church, and it's not a form of worship as in they're worshiping the image. It's to help them reflect on God and reflect on a moment. And that's what we wanted to do with the film as well, where you see the film, and at the end of the film, as in iconography, you can reflect on what you've seen. You can have a connection with God. You can have a connection to that other world. So that to a Coptic Christian, iconography is a very strong language, almost like a spoken language, but they do it through pictures, right? And that's part of their worship.
It's so engaging. I have to say, if somebody tells you, I want you to see a 13, 14-minute movie about 21 Christians who get their heads cut off because they won't renounce Jesus, you think, thank you very much, I don't want to see that movie. But because this is animated and not live action, it's not a documentary, I think it's very appropriate and important for everybody to see it.
The release of the film, The 21, comes on the 10th anniversary of their martyrdom. CBN News covered 2 screenings, one in Cairo and the other here in Minya.
It's very tastefully done, but it's also very evocative. It's the animation using Egyptian iconography. This is Egyptian Christian, specifically Christian artwork. It makes it very, very interesting. When these ISIS terrorists occasionally think they see Jesus or see angels, or there's like spiritual warfare crackling in both directions. How would you depict that in a documentary? You can't. So there's something very, very moving. I'm still trying to catch my breath because I was crying at the end.
Jonathan Rumi, who plays Jesus on The Chosen, is an executive producer. He tells CBN News the martyrdom of these 21 men transcended tragedy by becoming a testament of faith for persecuted Christians worldwide.
I think I want people to be more aware of the sacrifices that so many Christians give, especially in other parts of the world. Martyrdom is not something that is common in the Western world, but in the Middle East, in the Orient, and in places where there are legitimate physical threats to people on a daily basis, they just set an example for the rest of the world about what it means to be a believer in Christ and to have your faith mean everything.
They caught one guard, and he was the one that explained all the details of what happened to the men, how they were tortured, how they were caught, how they rehearsed the video 2 times before. They marched them on the beach, they had the cameras rolling, and they prepared their filming, and then the 3rd time was when they were beheaded.
Tortures included being sprayed with cold water, not letting them sleep in the cold of winter. It included having them drag wet sand through the desert until they collapsed. It included burning them with irons, emotional torture, isolation, so all kinds of different tortures, physical and emotional.
As head of Coptic Orphans, Riyadh and her ministry were already working in the village of the 21.
We are working very closely with the church and with the bishop. And so now that there are new fatherless children, we were able to embrace them and enroll them into our programs so that we could walk with them that journey, the journey of healing, the journey of support, both financial and emotional support.
She now knows them as family.
They are resilient. They are a joy. You wouldn't think that. You would think that they were traumatized and still will be traumatized, but yet they have a peace. They have a joy that's, in all honesty, contagious when you see how much they know that Christ is with them, that Christ is the one who is giving them that peace. And they are thankful. I was sitting in the middle of all the widows when they were seeing it for the very first time. And the comments of, Ya Habibi Asom, my beloved Asom, a mother almost reliving her sense with having lost her son. But at the same time, she says, you have made it so we can lift our heads high, my beloved.
It was a very impactful film, but God gave us comfort. And we know that they testified to Christ, and God gave them a lot of strength as well. You have to remember these are young men and they're not very well off, but look how strong their faith was. And you also have to remember that they didn't know how they were going to get back to Egypt. They didn't know anything in front of them, but all they knew was that God was with them. We're all sisters. We're one hand working together, and we visit each other. We're not like separate. We're all one.
I felt tearful, and it really impacted me. But nevertheless, it was very beautiful.
Do you forgive the men of ISIS?
Dash? Yes.
Yes, of course, because they're the reason that these martyrs went to heaven in the first place.
Talk about the miracles that they experienced.
One young mother was talking about how her son had tripped down the stairs and broke his wrist. He went to the emergency room or to the hospital and had it cast. And he tells his mother, "No, Dad came to me and said you don't need the cast." And then later that day, they see visions of the father, and the little boy, who was 6 at the time, says, "Here, I don't need this cast," and took it off almost like a glove. So the mother was astounded at this. She takes him back to the doctor. The doctor does another x-ray, and he says, "I have no idea what happened. Your arm is completely healed, and I'm keeping this cast as a memory of this miracle."
And I think this film not only draws our attention to who are the Coptic Christians, the Egyptian Christians, who go back to St. Mark, right? Mark brought the gospel. Who wrote the gospel? He brought the gospel. And that's why there is a church in Egypt. And I've learned a lot just being on this trip, visiting with Christians, going to different churches, and watching this film for my first time in this very special screening in Cairo. This is actually a very inspiring story. What man planned for evil, Amen. God used for good.
All of us as Christians working together, we have to support each other. Whether children of martyrs, whether children who've lost their fathers, it's up to us. If we don't do it, who will? So God asks that we be salt to the earth and light to the world. And it's through helping the disadvantaged, the persecuted, the downtrodden, that the world sees who we really are.
For many, the film The 21 raises the question, how would I respond under such pressure, torture, and even the threat of death? Rumi also spent time with the families.
It was pretty intense and humbling, and their joy and their forgiveness for the killers is something that just defies human comprehension, and serves as an example for all of us as to how to live Christ's, laws and rules and ethos of, turning the other cheek and forgiving your enemy and praying for those who persecute you. These women and families are living that out.
There are some people who say to us, "Wow, it's already been 10 years. But for us, it's like we've been climbing a mountain. We really feel like we miss them, and we don't forget about that just because they're martyrs. But of course, God is strengthening us, and He's never left us. I hope that in the same way that the story of the martyrs has been able to affect the whole world, that this film also will have an impact on the whole world. And the thing that touched me the most in this film is when we saw the feet of the martyrs walking alongside the feet of Christ.
When we first started the film, we didn't actually have a story. And then when we went to Egypt, we talked to the wives, to the widows, to the children, to the parents. And I asked them, I said, what would you like to put on screen? What would you like to see? And they said, our only message is we don't want ISIS, we don't want these terrorists to go to hell. We want them to know the love of Christ. We want them to know God. And that moved me in such a powerful way. I knew what the story had to be. I knew what the message had to be. Just their testimony has changed my faith and how I interact with God, how I interact with my art and the purpose of my art.
For the first time in history, both the Coptic Church and the Catholic Church recognize the 21 as saints. Rogers has 3 hopes for the film.
One is a deeper understanding of our own Christian heritage in this region. A second, it would be wonderful to see this film be promoted widely so that people outside the church can see the courage and the faith of the martyrs and be encouraged in their own faith. And just to kind of promote a freedom of religion, that people can practice whatever they want to believe without persecution would be the third goal.
The 21 doesn't just recount history. It invites viewers to reflect on what faith truly means when faced with death.
We want the world to know and be inspired and challenged by this story. It's a very specific story, and yet it's also universal. And for us as a team, one of the things that we've had to ask ourselves constantly in light of this story is, what would I be willing to die for? And I think that's an important question for every human being.
The film poses a question that I think is worthy to each and every one of us that are followers of Christ. How would we respond to that call? What would we do in their shoes? Could we be as faithful? And I find myself challenged by the question, and I pray the answer is yes, and in my heart it's yes, and I pray, I will go to my grave with the same confession of Jesus' name on my lips. That is the aspiration towards sainthood and to follow Christ and what it truly means to be a follower. But the question remains, like, could you do it? Would you do it? Yeah. What if you were them?
This is the shrine to honor the 21. It includes their caskets, the orange jumpsuits they were forced to wear, even the zip ties that bound their hands, and some of the rock and sands from the beach where they were martyred.
I would tell them, you should watch the video of the incident, and you should see how calm and peaceful these men are, and how they're all together. They left no one behind. And let this be an inspiration for you.
Look, we know that we're living in the worst age of persecution in the 2,000-year history of the church, and that's saying something, because there's been, there was the Romans, and then there's been all kinds of challenges and dangers to followers of Jesus throughout the last 2,000 years. But we're definitely in the era of the most imprisonments, the most murders, the most persecution of Christians in history. So, and prophecy tells us it's going to get worse. That's not encouraging. So one of the things we have to say is, all right, Lord, how do we learn from those who've gone before us? Not just 2,000 years ago or 500 years ago or 100 years ago, but how do we learn from people who are modern day martyrs? We don't want to do this. We don't want to have to go through this. But I think we can learn a lot by learning from the courage of, in this case, 21 men, 20 Egyptians and one Ghanaian who loved Jesus so much that even though they were offered money and they were threatened and they were tortured, they said, the next person we're going to see is Jesus, so we're not going to betray him.
I think I'd just like to express how deeply honored I am to be a part of the project, and I want so many people to see this, and I can't wait to share it with my audience and the rest of the world.
Everybody who sees the film on the 10th anniversary, we hope and pray will forward it to somebody else to watch it, including people that may not know Jesus. And I think the way I feel now is we've got something that we've produced that really can be shared and be effective in introducing people to Jesus.
Oh, I would love to see every single Christian around the world to watch this movie. It's inspirational, it gives us hope, and it shows us the power of faith in our Lord Jesus Christ. So I'm praying that indeed it will spread like wildfire.
10 years ago, the martyrs walked to their deaths. Their final words, the name of Jesus. Now, 10 years later, their testimony continues to inspire millions. It's been said that the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. These 21 men left behind a legacy of love, devotion, and the ultimate sacrifice that's become an inspiration for millions around the world. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.